Hello everyone, Ember here, and welcome back to a new video. In this one, I'm going to be taking a look at the Many Amoonguss of GLC, which is a very strange Pokemon that has some, well, very strange cards, frankly, even in GLC. So, what is GLC for those of you who don't know? It's a single prize only no Robux format. It is singleton, except for basic energy, and you're only allowed one type per deck, which is really simple in the case of Amoonguss because it's just pre-printed in grass types basically and no other types. So, just for some basics before we get going, we have, of course, the big man himself, Foongus. Now, you don't really have many great options. I would say Enticing Pattern might be the best one because it's basically half a call for family, which is probably the best you're ever going to get. If you happen to be running like Pokeball in your list, then maybe this other Foongus with Playball is okay, but for the most part, it shouldn't really matter too much, and 50 HP is probably better than 40, right? So, yeah, that is Foongus, ladies and gentlemen. Nothing too crazy. But yeah, as for the Amoonguss, this first one from the black and white era, honestly isn't that bad. Like, it could be way worse. Toxic does poison and then does 2 damage counters instead of 1. So you will be able to do 40 damage if you have a Perilous Jungle in play, which is quite nice. So if you really, really, really wanted a Poison Amoonguss, then this one is fine. Also does Paralysis on a coin flip, but it is worth mentioning there are better Amoongusses later on in the video that interact with poison. So, yeah, just something to bear in mind, but still not the worst, uncommon stage 1 final evolution I've ever seen. But yeah, could be way better. The next one is a bit more interesting, has the ability Spore. That says when you play this Pokemon from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon, you may use this ability. And if you do, your opponent's active Pokemon is now confused and poisoned, which is really fun because it combos quite nicely with things like this Bellsprout, as well as, the Victory Beels as well. Also, this Cradley, which happens to do 100 damage for each special condition affecting your opponent's active Pokemon. So, like, you could build a GLC deck around this Cradley using this Amoonguss, and, like, maybe I guess, like, the Victory Beel. Is it Victory Beel? I think it might be Weeping Bell, actually, the one that has, like, a very similar ability, but it's, like, Poison and Burn or something. But yeah, you could definitely build a fun deck with those Pokemon. So I do think it's quite cool that, Bellsprout could be an alternate attacker. You've got Cradley, got a Moongus with a Spore Prize. Just a bit of a fun, memey kind of deck, but, a fun use nevertheless for Amoonguss. So I definitely think this Amoonguss is at least, it's decent. It's not terrible. Next up is we have a one from Plasma Storm. Now, this does have the Team Plasma badge on it, which means you can actually use Team Plasma Synergy, which is really cool. So your main attack here really is Astonish. It is a coin flip, but if you get heads, you get to choose 3 random cards from your opponent's hand, and they get shuffled back into their deck, which is really cool. Means you can use like some other control synergy, like Xerasic, for example. But of course, like the main appeal here is that you get to use the Team Plasma stuff. So like Reversal Trigger, Frozen City won't trigger for you, but it will for your opponent. Things like Team Plasma Grunt for some extra draw power. You could even play other Team Plasma grass types in your GLC deck, like this Torterra, for example, which is really cool. Also has the attack Miracle Powder, by the way. For grass colors, does 30, and then you get to flip a coin, and if you get lucky, you get to choose any special condition, which could be something like Paralysis, it could be Confusion, it could be Poison, so it's like a pseudo control piece, really, but, you may as well exploit the fact that it's a Team Plasma Pokemon if you're going to play it, so kind of cool at least that we've got an Amoonguss with a fair bit of flavor to it. Next one is a bit of a weird one, to be honest. Crazy Spore for 1 colorless. Confuses and poisons your opponent's active, and then Strange Reaction does 30, but if they were confused, they are now paralyzed. And to be honest, I think there is some situations where you kind of want your opponent to remain confused, just to see if they'll like try and flip the coin. If they flip tails, they're going to take another 30 off that. So I think there's some weird situations where confusion might actually be better than paralysis, to be honest. But yeah, it's an interesting card. I don't think it's very good. Like unless you have another way of inflicting the confusion special condition, I just don't think this Amoonguss is very good. Like the ones before it, I think are pretty good, but yeah, this Amoonguss, yeah, letting the side down a bit. It's a bit bad. The next one is kind of interesting. It has the very powerful ability Bursting Spores. It says whenever you play a Pokemon that has the Spore attack from your hand during your turn, you may leave your opponent's active Pokemon asleep and poisoned. Now, sadly, I think the only Pokemon with Spore are either fighting types or Foongus. like one of the Foongus that we looked at the start of the video. So unless you cheat this Amoonguss out into play, there's actually no way you'll be able to trigger this ability. However, the attack is pretty good. Venom Shock for 2 colors does 20 and 70 more if your opponent's active is poisoned. So if you play something like this Aridos or like the Weeping Bell that we mentioned earlier, you could inflict poison that way and then just do 90 and then poison will, keep it up, basically just adding more damage. That's cool. So I do think in like a weird poisoned Aridos box, you could do way worse for this Amoonguss. Definitely one that I have in the binder somewhere, or in the bulk pile, I should say. So yeah, I could definitely see this Amoonguss being useful in some situations, but it's just more of a budget-friendly poison option, basically. Nothing too crazy, but nothing terrible either. Next up is we have a one from Silver Tempest. Now, this is the really funny Amoonguss. It's not very good, and it's probably never going to trigger in a game, but if it does, it's hilarious, right? Has the ability Surprise Spores. It says, during your opponent's turn, if this Pokemon is discarded from your hand by an effect of an attack or an ability from your opponent's Pokemon, or by any effect of your opponent's item or supporter cards, discard your opponent's hand. So if your opponent plays like a Hand Trimmer or Xerasic and you get to discard a Amoonguss, then they have to discard their entire hand, which is of course a devastating effect in most situations. So yeah, an amazing card, by the way, just an amazing Amoonguss. You could also just run this without the Foongus, just run it in your deck normally, and then never run the risk of starting with Foongus, but to be honest, it's not great. Like, Hypno Hammer is a bit weak. The ability is probably never going to trigger most of the time. Like, unless you have, like, a friend, right, who's always using hand trimmers on you, then I don't think this card is particularly great. Like, it is funny when it goes off, but, when is it going to go off is the next question. If we ever get, like, more hand trimmer style effects in the TCG, maybe this Amoonguss could be good in GLC, but yeah, as it stands, just a bit of a weird card, to be honest. And lastly, we have a one from City in Flames. I was actually running this in my Grass DLC deck. I did end up removing it because it's pretty terrible, but I do love the artwork for this one, so it gets a lot of brownie points. But Dangerous Spores does 60 damage, and you get to flip a coin, and if heads, your opponent's active Pokemon is now paralyzed and poisoned. Paralysis on a coin flip with poison is honestly not that bad, especially with Glimwood Tangle. Just means that you do have to land heads though, otherwise, you're not doing paralysis and you're not doing poison, and you're just doing 60 base, which is, why this card ended up getting removed from my GLC deck. But I think you could do way worse, especially if you're running coin flip altering cards. But yeah, for the most part, a very strange list of Amoonguss, just plenty of unusual options and cards. It's a very strange Pokemon anyway, like the whole thing is modeled off a Pokeball design anyway, but yeah, it's a very interesting Pokemon. But yeah, thank you for watching. I do need to set a review for GLC with each new release, so subscribe if you're interested in being updated. This is now a series to stay, of course, so let me know which Pokemon you'd like to see in the future. There is a list, but getting through them, and a playlist has been made. I think the last two to cover are like Lapras and Charizard, I think. But yeah, if you want to dive into the competitive side, Omnipoke and the format creator Trigger Gym have both done fantastic videos and guides for each type. So yeah, it's been Ember Power. Will you be running Amoonguss in your Grass GLC deck? And yeah, thank you for watching.